Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Marketing Scientists. Today, I'll be speaking with Bill Macaitis, the former CMO of Slack and Zendesk. Not only that, he also spent quality time with top brands like Salesforce, Fox, and IGN. This was a banger. 3 things that I think you'll enjoy in this episode. First, Bill and I had a great debate on the role of marketing in B2B orgs. Second, we talked about setting clear priorities with the V2 MOM framework. And then last but definitely not the least, we talked about how to hold your CMO or marketing leader accountable if you are a CEO. Let's dive straight in. Bill, thank you for joining us. This is going to be a ton of fun. I've seen your, LinkedIn posts and shorts recently in the last couple of months, and really impressed with sort of the content that you've been putting out. So thank you for joining me on this podcast, and I'm excited to get, straight into it.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Amazing. Okay. So you and I exchanged, we met a little while ago and we exchanged some notes on attribution. I want to go straight into the lion's den with attribution.
Let's do
So,
it.
some of the questions that I get sometimes from, investors, from, CMOs is, hey, this problem has been around forever, right? It's not a new problem, like what's working, what's not working. Why hasn't anybody solved this? Why hasn't Salesforce solved this? Why hasn't, the marketing leader solved this? What do you think?
It's a really hard problem. I think it's a couple things, right? Like one is these are not simple journeys. I think sometimes people have this view that, oh, someone buys from you on a B2B, right? And they saw you 3 times and that's good. They buy you and we're done, right? And I think what I've spent a lot of time in my career, kind of diving into this. And what you find is people go on these journeys, and anyone that's sold to mid-market or enterprise know these deal cycles are 3, 6, 9 months, a year, 2 years long. And when you really start to uncover it, you realize hey, this is 5, 10, 20, 30 impressions, right? 30 interactions that someone's having with you, some online, some offline, some on mobile, some on desktop. It's a harder one to crack. And I think that's led to a lot of, frustration from marketers, frustration from C-suite, frustration from the CFO, because a lot of the reports that are generated just aren't accurate.
Okay. So let's talk about that point about the long sales cycle. And I'm actually curious to hear your take on this. My take on this is, yes, there is a long sales cycle. But if you take a step back and think about the role of marketing, right? What is the goal for a CMO? It's to bring and I could be wrong, but it's to bring people to your front door, to your doorstep, and engage in a meaningful initial conversation. There's a lot of things that I said here, right? Like come to the front door, meaningful engagement. And after that, yes, marketing can play a little bit of a role, but I would argue that it's a lot of the product and it's a lot of the sales. Am I wrong in making that simplified sort of assessment?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm going to give you my 2 cents on why I think it's wrong. I think a lot of people have a viewpoint that that's marketing's role. Marketing's role is literally just to fill top of funnel. And it's hey, our work here is done. We're going to, we got our lead, maybe our MQL, and we're going to move on to another one. Over the years of doing this for a while, what I've discovered is marketing is really good at automating things. Marketing is good at scaling things, right? And when you really look into it, for anybody that's listening to this, that's part of a SaaS company, add-on upgrade expansion is usually half your revenue or more, right? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of odd that I personally think that marketing just says, well, we got someone in the door and we're done here, right? We're going to let the product do it, or we're going to let sales do it, right? I personally feel that, hey, this is a long journey. It's a long journey to become a lead. Then it's a long journey to become a customer. And then it's a longer journey as they are a customer and they're expanding, right? So if marketing is good at messaging, at education, at content, at nurturing, why wouldn't we leverage those skills in an automated way across the entire funnel? Right. I think you can philosophically, you can almost look at marketing as automated sales, right? And product
Mm.
is even more automated marketing, right? So I do think that marketing has a role throughout the entire funnel, right? From lead to close business to expansion throughout the entire course of their life. And and I think that presents some opportunities, for these teams to work together, but it also presents some challenges for how do they measure that impact throughout all the various cycles of their stage. On the flip side, I would say, like, if you only have marketing focusing on top of funnel, it gets very expensive, right? Because basically what you're doing is you're relying on one-to-one knife fights with your sales or your customer success, which these days is really just sales that says they're there to help you, but really they're just there to sell you more, right? And that's not a very capital efficient way to grow, right?
Mm.
So I think, like, with today's intense focus on capital efficiency, I would argue marketing has to take a much more holistic viewpoint on what the role is and where they can provide support and nurturing.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I'm gonna push back a little bit
That's fine.
in
This is more
the
fun if we disagree sometimes.
yeah. No, I think I agree with your statement that marketing has a role to play on the full funnel all the way to expansion and upsell. Totally agree. It's not debatable. Um, my meta point was that yes, marketing has a role to play in that second part, but I think product and sales and customer success have a larger role to play in that second part, right? Of hey, and I say this as a former marketer turned founder, where I'm playing the marketing hat and the sales hat. So to me, practically, it doesn't make a difference. But I'm like trying to better understand this as we scale this company, right? A sales conversation is a very different conversation from a marketing conversation. A product experience, right? And obviously, there's embedded marketing in there, right? In-app notifications, in-app messages, the copy, the life cycle, all of that is marketing. The reality that I have seen is that product is in a much better position as a team, as an organization, to be the driver of that end-to-end experience once you've made it inside the product. Same thing for sales. Once you have an active conversation with a prospect and you've got 5 follow-ups and meetings set up, sales is in the driver's seat of that conversation. It's their job to pull in their marketing counterparts, right? It's product's job to pull in their marketing counterparts, because you get to 1,000-person, 5,000-person company and you're getting to defined roles and responsibilities. So I'm thinking about it from that perspective of absolutely marketing has a role to play. They need to have a seat at the table, but it's also on product and sales to pull marketing in because they are in the driver's seat. But I could be wrong. Like I'm curious to hear
I
your thought on that.
it's a really good discussion. It's actually a really good philosophical discussion. I think sometimes what happens is, at the end of the day, we want to provide a great experience for the user, right? And a lot of times, what I've seen is in SaaS and AI companies, for whatever reason, they will traditionally organize around classical functional domain expertise. So you'll have marketing, you'll have sales, success, support, right? Product. And I think a lot of times that gives a very disjointed experience. It gives a very, like, siloed experience, right? Like, this team is in charge of this stage, and oh, you have to talk to this person because our lead routing rule said you had to. And okay, now you're getting handed off to another person because you've hit another stage. And I would just say this, like, I think, like, holistically, I've tried to always look at things from a customer centric point of view, and I want to give them a great experience. And I would even maybe challenge that the traditional way we organize in software companies is the right way. For example, I worked with a SaaS company and they decided to organize around stage of life, right? But they had marketing, sales, success support. All these teams were part of, like, almost an agile scrum team that
Love
looked at,
it.
like, the stage they were at, and they all worked together, right? And so I just don't like philosophically when a lot of these teams kind of get super siloed and just say they're only in charge of one stage, because I
Yeah.
think, like, they all offer different skill sets.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that would be my viewpoint on it. Obviously, a lot of companies are organized that way, and I've usually advocated, hey, to get these teams to work together, because they're naturally going to want to go siloed, right? The bigger you
Yeah.
get, the more siloed they're going to get. I usually really argue for shared metrics, right? Like, don't just give
Yeah.
marketing MQLs, give them, align them the same metrics that sales has or success has, or share in like an overall net promoter score for the overall company, so you don't pollute these experiences at different stages. I think there's different ways to go about it, but that would be my opinion on it.
I like that, and challenging the status quo on how we organize ourselves is a good one, right? I had a similar thought on the marketing side. Even within marketing, right? We've got product marketing and content marketing
Yeah.
and lifecycle marketing and brand marketing, and you call it. And I used to always think like, hey, we could take inspiration from our EPD friends and be organized in more squad-like structures where
Yes.
you've got, right, a product marketer, content marketer, growth marketer all sitting together and thinking about holistically what are we doing as a marketing team, as opposed to siloed teams within marketing. Have you seen anybody do that well, or have you had experience with that?
Yeah, it's a really great point in that these teams, marketing, sales, success, support naturally are going to get siloed. But even within these teams, right? Like product marketing and content and analytics and SCM, and they're all want to get super siloed, right? They're all going to want to do their thing. So it's funny. I did a video on this. I don't think I've released it yet, but it basically talked to a little bit about how we prioritize at Salesforce. And we used a methodology called the V2 MOM. And the base idea
Mm.
was like, hey, you would set 5 or 10 priorities as a company, and everyone would work together on those priorities. And it would cascade down, right? In marketing, you'd have your own V2 MOM, you'd have 10 priorities. But the basic idea was that a lot of these projects needed multiple teams to work on them in order
Mm.
for them to be successful. And that's what I found in my experience, is that when you go down the route of purely siloed teams and they only work on projects that they can totally control, they have like small to medium size impact, those projects. When you take on a project that requires multiple teams within marketing working on it, it has a much larger impact. And I would even argue when you work on a project, let's say like in product education, right? I'm a big PLG fan.
Yep.
I love in product education. We use it as Zendesk and Slack. The base idea is like you create a module within the product that marketing can then use to both, show great content to those users, show how customers are using the product, show about new features, maybe there's new pricing plans, whatever it is, right? That requires multiple teams within marketing working together, but also working with product, right?
Mhm.
But it has a huge impact, but it's a much harder, project to pull off. So yeah, I think wherever you can do that, either through prioritization, like using the V2MOM or OKRs, through having shared metrics, through org design, right? Where you have more of these Scrum Agile teams that work together, like you're going to have a much bigger impact on it.
I love listening to a CMO talking about Scrum and Agile and V2 Mom. This is awesome. I think more CMOs should be talking that language. Tell me about V2 Mom. It's not top of mind. I've seen that acronym, but I don't know what it is. I can't remember it.
Sure. So it was
Yeah.
kind of the basis that Salesforce used pretty early. So
Mm.
it stands for, it's a big one: vision, values, methods, obstacles, metrics. I'm doing another video on SaaS CMO specifically on this one because I think it's like a really cool methodology. But basically, the idea is like what what I had experienced before Salesforce, and I think what a lot of people have experienced is they worked for a company, a CEO or a manager. And the manager, and I've had this happen to me, the manager would come to me and go, Bill, this is really important. We should do this. Oh, Bill, this is important too. You should do this. This is important. This is important. Do this. This is. I would have a list of 20 items to do, right? My capacity line, I could do like 7 if I'm working 80 hours a week. And I had no idea which one was more important because everyone just told me like, this is important, this is important, this is important, right? So I think the idea behind a V2 Mom is there's 2 crucial elements here. One, you say you come up with a list of projects, but it's only the list is it stops at your capacity line. So in my example, I would have a list of 7 projects, right?
Mm.
If it's after 7, the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, you wouldn't do, right? Or you could turn around and go, hey, we can do more, but I need more resources. I need more heads, whatever it is. And then you would work either yourself or again with your team to stack rank those 7. So Mark would come in, and some years he would go like, it was kind of tough. Like we had multiple product lines. We
Mm.
had like a customer service software. We had the sales cloud. We had the platform. We had all these different clouds. But sometimes some years he would come to us and say, hey guys, this year the service cloud is the number one important item to focus on. Then after that, he might say like, look, we want to increase our market share in Japan. After
Mm.
that, he might go, hey, we need to hire 1,000 AEs.
Mm.
Okay, now as I'm the CMO or the marketer or whoever, I have a structured list. Because what happens to bigger companies is everybody comes to marketing and asks for stuff,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, hey, Bill, we work on the data cloud. Hey, can you give us more budget? It's really important we do this, right? But now I've got a structured list. I'm like, well, Mark just said, sorry, Service Cloud is number one, right? I'm giving that the bulk of my budget. And actually, after that, I'm giving Japan a lot of love because, that was the
Yeah.
second biggest one. And then, oh, we have to hire 1,000 AEs. Hey, I'm good at marketing. I'm good at creating demand. I'm going to work with the recruiting team to refresh that website. And I'm
Mm.
going to give it a lot more energy. I'm going to run some demand gen campaigns because we have those skill sets in marketing, right? Whereas before that, without Avicii or really any type of prioritization, I like OKRs, but historically, when I've seen them, they haven't introduced the concept of a stack rank, right? Where you have
Right.
to choose your children, which is really difficult, right? You're like,
Yeah.
this children's more important than this children this year. But it forces that prioritization and it allows teams to focus on what's important, right? So
Mm.
it's kind of a simple concept, but I thought like it was one of the best things that I learned being a part of Salesforce.
You said something that was really interesting in that, which was, Mark would come to you with these, very clear objectives. I also find that a lot of organizations struggle from a consensus driven approach at the top leadership, where, maybe the founders or the CEOs are not being as clear about what their vision and strategy is, and they're more people oriented. They're like, hey, like here's what the product team thinks and here's what the engineering team thinks. Have you been in that situation ever, and how do you tackle that if you have been?
Yeah. So after I finished Slack, I was kind of like, what do I do? Do I go down the VC route? Do I do the advisor route? And I kind of went down the advisor board member route. And so I started working with a lot more SaaS and AI companies. And one of the things I would see a lot is what you had mentioned, where, I'd be talking to maybe the executive team and there'd be like, 10 people on this call. And sometimes I would do a fun exercise, which was maybe not as fun, but I would ask them, I'm like, okay, guys, without talking to each other, write down on a piece of paper what the top three, priorities are for
Nice.
the company, right? And you would just get like 17 different answers, or a lot of people didn't know. And that is really tough, right? I would just say, like, for me, my experience, like, I think you can make a huge impact. Literally, if you're a leader, CEO, founder, C suite, whatever it is, just set clear priorities and
Mm.
articulate those and constantly repeat them. Like the best leaders I found would use every opportunity, every all hands, every staff meeting, every one on one. Hey, here are the top priorities, right? Or maybe, they change sometimes too. This one's moving up higher, they're taking this one off the list. But that makes a huge, huge difference. Mark once told me that he was like, it got harder and harder Salesforce because we get more and more people as the company grew, and they all kind of want to go off and do their own thing, right? And you'd have
Yep.
to like rein them in and get everyone focused again on what that top priority was. And you see this in marketing a lot of times too, where sometimes if the CMO doesn't set clear priorities or metrics, what will happen is they'll just default to all the teams. Like, well, I don't
Yep.
know, what do you think you should do, PR team, or what do you think you should do? And then they create their own metrics and they get very siloed. And again, these teams, that's where you like it naturally goes there. So yeah, I thought the VTMOM was really helpful for that. I would definitely recommend it.
Okay. Amazing. All right. So switching gears a little bit, you've been a PLG fan. You talk a lot about PLG, and I also love how just naturally you talk about SaaS and AI companies. Like, yeah, there are some people like, well, AI, is that a thing or not? You're just all in on it. It feels like from an outsider's perspective, which is awesome. Like, I think that's great. Um, so let's talk about PLG and AI and sort of what's happening there from a marketer's lens. And most times I hear those type of companies kind of focus all in on like growth and product teams kind of driving and being in the driver's seat. How do you think about marketing in a PLG or an AI organization? What does that look like? What are the top sort of things that you would say to a VP of marketing entering those type of organizations?
Yeah, everyone will have a different definition on what PLG is. My personal point of view is that people are spending more and more of their time in the product. And you need to infuse your marketing into the product, your sales into the product, your success into the product, your support into the product, all these customer facing teams, because in the old days, like people would go to your website and read your blog and talk to a salesperson. But nowadays it's like they're just, with PLG, you're getting people right into that AI tool, right? You're getting them to use it more often. And my point of view is like PLG doesn't just mean the product team does it. PLG just means, hey, people spend their time in the product. You have to think out, how do you build a high velocity motion within that, right? So like at Slack, we spent a lot of our time is we had sales there. We had sales at Slack. Some people didn't think we had that,
Yeah,
but we had a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
sales at Slack. But we would work with sales and we go, hey, what are the top objections you're getting? Right? Like, how do we infuse that into the product itself? Success, we would see, all right, where do people keep stumbling when they're trying to implement Slack? Okay, let's work with product to improve that. So you just don't have to reactively go for it. Marketing, we talked about in product education, but another one is like infuse your brand into the product, right? The thing
Mm,
with like AI and SaaS, and I love it, but I don't care what space you're in, you have 10 competitors,
yeah.
right? And usually in B2B, 9 of these 10 look exactly the same, right? You can be the one that's different, pick a
Mm,
strong color palette, right? Like at Zendesk early on, we chose green and we just owned it. Green was everywhere, right? Or at Slack, we said, hey, we're gonna have a really unique tone and voice, but we're gonna not just have the backend developers write all of our prompts and language within the
yeah.
program within Slack. We're gonna have like our best writer that worked in marketing, but also have her write all of these different prompts and messages and make it fun and witty and entertaining. Right? There's so many opportunities to do that. So I do think like that's just a natural extension. Like marketing just has certain skill sets. They're creative, they're good at content, they're good at conversion rate optimization, right? And a lot of those skill sets in a PLG motion, you want to use, you want to reduce friction, you want to get time to value faster, you want to make a more fun product, you want to make a more product that's sticky that people keep coming back. And to do those, you need to infuse these teams to work together.
I like that idea a lot of the infusion. And I remember, there was a post from Slack that went viral a couple of years ago. I don't know if it was during your time or after your time, where they put like a story in the iOS update. I don't know
Yes.
if you remember this, and it just
Yes.
like everyone was laughing about it and sharing it on social. And I thought that was so like nobody would think about that as a marketing channel, but the team at Slack did, which was awesome.
Yeah, we started doing custom messages for the release notes really early on. So I joined Slack
Uh,
when maybe there were about 50 people. I was their first, kind of
wow.
marketer and CMO and built out the team out. But yeah, we always thought that was a great touch point. And at the end of the day, like I view the brand as the sum of all these interactions that people are having with your service, right? And, release notes, it's kind of a boring area that a lot of people don't look at, but it is a little interaction. It's a little touch point, right?
Uh,
So we were always like, how do we delight people? How do we, put a smile on their face? How do we tell a story? Or, I remember at one point during COVID, it was just like, hey, how's everyone doing? Are you doing okay?
yeah,
Are you getting enough
yeah.
sleep? Right. I just think those are great opportunities that you have to build a relationship with your customer and really differentiate yourself from the other B2B AI companies that aren't thinking about that at all.
Right. And your time at Slack, you mentioned you were 50 people when you joined. It was on a tear, right? It was just growing like a weed. Amazing traction. I think that you guys were the fastest to some milestone. I can't remember what that
Yes. Yeah. I
milestone
think it's
was.
100 million, but yeah.
And at the same time, though, you talk about your experience with brand marketing and out of home. What was going on there? Why were you doing that if PLG was just taking off? Talk to me about sort of the balance that you were trying to strike there.
Yeah. I think whenever you're capturing a category, right, that has a huge TAM, you want to grow as fast as you can, with and still be capital efficient, right? So the way I look at it is, let's say you're growing really fast, right? I'm going to put a visual here, right?
Yeah.
Imagine there's this bar chart, you're growing super fast. It's PLG, word of mouth, NPS, everything's going great, right? Well, what if you want to grow even faster,
Mm.
right? What would you do to even help accelerate that further? And so I always look at it as like you have the spectrum of these efficient drivers of growth, right? And I would argue like the least efficient in my mind, and this may ruffle some feathers, but I would say like, hey, just doing purely outbound sales, right? Where you're cold calling
Mm.
into people. It's expensive. It requires a lot of SDRs. You got to close with A's. Inbound sales is a little more efficient, right? Sales aren't calling out, but they're still closing deals. Then you have what I call marketing outbound, where you're doing these offline campaigns. We'll talk a little bit about that. Then you have marketing inbound, more efficient, right? Now you're moving
Hmm.
more efficient on the scale here, where you're like talking about content and SEO and organic and, earned media. And then you have like PLG, super efficient, viral growth loops, word of mouth. So you have this efficiency spectrum. Now, if you only do the most efficient, it's great, but you hit your growth, you're something incredible, but you could even go further, right? And so what we did is we leveraged all these other levels, and we were always thinking about what's more efficient. But for going out and doing these offline campaigns, that was a way for us to help accelerate the growth. And on a blended CAC, or cost per acquisition, it would still make sense for us. And also what you find out too is when you're growing really fast, and even like you're a hot new AI startup and everyone in San Francisco knows you. Well, when I went outside of San Francisco, I went to the East
Yeah.
Coast, and I'm talking at like a government conference, which I did. Like, be like, who the hell are
Nice.
you, right? Like, Slack, what is that? Like, that makes it.
Yeah.
Why'd you choose Slack? That's a horrible name. That's what they normally say. And so a lot of times you're going into new countries, regions, and I found like these, when you're using more paid media campaigns, it does allow you to expose yourself to new users and to also, increase that growth even further.
You just hit the nail on the head in terms of how I describe it, which is you're bringing incremental growth that you would not have got otherwise with your PLG motion or your whatever your existing motions are. And great CMOs like yourself are always on the hunt for that next incremental growth because you can never be satisfied with where you are today, right? That's how I think about it. You got to be paranoid about sort of
Yeah.
taking that market, right? There's somebody. Have you read the book the Category Pirates? I think that's the name.
I don't think so, but I've heard of it though.
So Chris Lockheed, I think he has this book and he talks about sort of 70% of the market or 60% of the market is taken by the winner, right?
Mhm.
Like, and everybody else is kind of fighting for second position or third position,
Yep.
the chump change that's left. Um, and so if you're gonna aim to be number one, you don't have a choice but to always be on that hunt for that next incremental growth. And it's less about, you talk about efficiency and efficient channels, like yes, but also go for incremental growth because otherwise you may not even be in a position to go for efficiency. Okay, on that note, um, obviously, and hopefully you don't mind me talking about this.
That's great.
I saw this at Dropbox. I was there between 2013 and 2016. Great product, amazing PLG, word of mouth, all that fun stuff. But it's a tough market, right? In the sense of you had, Google and Microsoft coming in and sort of just taking a lot of share.
Yeah.
You all experienced that with, Microsoft and
Yeah.
Teams. Not as much
Mhm.
with Google. I don't think Google has a comparing product. How did you all think about that when that started? And if you had to go back in time and do something differently, what would you do differently, if anything? I'm just sort of curious from a historian perspective.
Yeah. So Teams, when they really started coming on, that was a little after me.
Okay. Yeah.
So this is more just sitting from the sidelines, right?
Right.
Um, I do think like I've been a strong proponent of always being customer centric, right? Like I don't like looking at the competitors as much as I like looking at like, hey, how do we make our products even more simple, more delightful? I do think like, it's interesting looking back. I wonder, should have Slack gone multi-product earlier, right? I always thought like one of the core elements of Slack in our values and our vision were we were very customer centric. We always thought about the customer, right? Empathy, put them in our shoes. How do we make their lives simpler, more pleasant, more productive, right? And I think that goes beyond messaging, right? You look at a lot of these companies like HubSpot or Zendesk or Salesforce, they all started with one product and they eventually moved on to others there. Where Microsoft has a huge advantage is how they price and package, right? So a lot of times what they will do is you'll just be on an ELA deal and they will just give away that whatever the new product is and just fold that in, right? And I think in some ways that made a really good union of Salesforce and Slack, two companies that both worked at. So I was so excited when they,
Right.
kind of came together because Salesforce had a much larger distribution. And they also had a multi-product family where they could get kind of creative with that. But, it's always difficult. I think even now for a lot of these AI startups and SaaS startups, you have some of these 500-pound gorillas in the space, right? And it's tough. Sometimes I think it stamps out a little of the innovation of it,
Mm,
right? And that's why I'm really excited, even with OpenAI, even though they have the Microsoft investment, right? It's like one of the few that are coming out that they're not just one of the big ones, right? They're going to dominate the space. So I think that's something like every startup, has to be aware of, has to be cognizant of. And at the end of the day, I'm always like, I'm a big customer centric one. Just deliver great value, delight your customers, get a really high NPS, try to get up to the 80, 90 type score, and you're going to do great.
okay, I like that. So focusing on customer delight rather than focusing on competition. I get that. I totally get that. Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. One thing that I want to end with is, let's say you are a Series B, Series C startup in the SaaS space, and you have a new marketing leader, right? VP of marketing, CMO, whatever that might be. Um, what would you say? How would you hold that marketing leader accountable? How should a business hold that marketing leader accountable, given all the challenges that we've talked about? If you were a CEO or a board member advising the CEO of that Series B startup, what advice would you give them?
Well, my first piece of advice would go to saascmopro.com.
I
Sign up
love
for the
it.
free newsletter, and you're going to get tons of videos on all these topics around marketing and branding and attribution and everything
I
else.
strategically placed that question right here at
Thank
the
you. That
end.
was very nice
Yes.
of you. And it's free. No, I do think like I have a lot of empathy for any new marketing leaders, on both sides, right? For the startup working with the marketing leader and the marketing leader working with this startup, right? So the biggest thing I would say is I really think you need to focus on what are the right marketing metrics.
Mm,
I have another video just on marketing metrics, but this is a really important one, right? Because I do think like we're way past the stage where marketing is not measurable. Marketing is absolutely measurable. We've talked about this. We always have great conversations on LinkedIn. Um, you need to be able to measure this stuff. And I also think too, there's a lot of different categories of metrics that marketing needs to be held accountable for. So there's certainly, we've talked about this, all the funnel type metrics. We talked about that earlier, right? Whether
yep.
it's MQLs, pipe, closed business, expansion, again, I like a little more holistic, longer term version there. But I do think marketing has a big influence also on these experience based metrics, right? Net
Mm,
promoter score, CSAT, right? Are we gating every piece of content and pissing people off, right? Are we giving them a good experience, right? Like, what does that look like? So I think you have experience-based metrics. I think you have things like internal stakeholder metrics. Like I use
mm,
those at Salesforce, where we had a lot of our teams worked with other teams within the organization. Like product marketing worked with sales. Well, we would run an internal stakeholder survey and go, hey, sales, how much value did we provide to you, right? Make them accountable, right? Make them help out there. You can have deliverable date-based metrics, right? Hey, we want to run this event on this day, or we want to change our messaging by this date, whatever it is, right? There's a lot of different metrics you can have. And I just think it's important to sit down with the Series B, Series C, sit down with the CMO and make sure, hey, you're aligning on what are the most important metrics. You may even go, hey, we want to invest in brand. I'm a big proponent of brand. I think in a lot of ways, brand is long term lead gen,
yep.
and
Yep.
demand gen is short term leads. Brand is long term leads, right? And you can measure brand, right? There's lots
Yes.
of different ways to measure it. Good metrics there: aided recall, unaided recall, sentiment, share voice, share conversation. There's a ton, right? But just you might say, hey, marketing, where are we at now? We want to improve how many people know about us, right? That's usually when I talk to Series B, Series C AI startups, or SaaS startups, that's one of the big things that come to me a lot of times. Like, Bill, we're doing good, but like no one knows about us. Every time we go into a
Mm,
new deal, we have to start from scratch. And, I have to explain who we are and what we do. And, I'd love to walk into a deal once where they already know about us and like, oh, I heard about you. Yeah, I love you guys. I've heard really good things about you. Right. So I just think it's important, like start with those metrics, get good alignments with your CMO, your VP on both sides, and you're going to be in a much better position.
I love that. The I did something very similar with my stakeholders at Bill.com. I led product marketing there. And my first thing was go talk to every cross functional stakeholder. And then I ran a survey at the end of every quarter
That's
to
awesome.
assess our relationship and contribution. And then be able to pinpoint and say, this is where we started, and this is the progress we've made over time, and this is where we are today, and this is what is in plan for future. And that, I think, had a very different sort of reception and reaction within
Yeah.
the business, right? Because product marketing was it was going through a lot of change after a couple of acquisitions and what have you. So that was super helpful. Amazing. Bill, this has been wonderful. So SaaSCMO.com.
Pro.
SaaSCMOPro.com. There we go.
SaaSCMOPro.com.
SaaSCMOPro.com.
Yes.
Yes.
SaaSCMOPro.com will get you there, and you can access all the videos. You get in a newsletter. It's usually once or twice a week. It come up with a new topic and has a corresponding video to it. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Or follow me on any of these shorts. So whether it's, LinkedIn, TikTok, Twitter, whatever you want, I have a profile there as well.
Amazing. Okay, last question before I let you go. TikTok, LinkedIn, YouTube. Which one's working the best for you right now?
I feel like right now LinkedIn seems to have the most traction, and it's probably because I had already had a large established network there. So when I start taking out content, a lot of people know it. But it's really interesting. I work with a lot of founders in different spaces. It's one I'm working with, one that's in Brazil, and they just have this amazing TikTok presence, right? And they've just built it up. And even now, like TikTok, I was kind of like, I'm not sure, and I start putting a video, but I'm starting to get more and more traction there, right? So, I think what's challenging is that, like my primary audience is a lot of these marketers, but also a lot of these AI founders, SaaS founders. And, there's some AI founders that are 60 or 50 years old, and there's some that are 18, right? And where they hang out is very different, right? Like some are on Twitter, some are on TikTok, some are on LinkedIn, right? So I've always taken more of an omni-channel type approach where you create great content, but then you distribute it to all these channels where people are, right? So yeah, it's been kind of fascinating watching those channels evolve over time.
All right, well, fantastic. I'm going to follow you on TikTok. I'll find you. I'm starting to grow a presence there as well.
Pro.
SaaSCMO Pro. Consistency. Love it. All right. Bill, we'll try to do this again in a few months. I'm super excited that we made this connection, and I'm definitely going to give you a follow on that newsletter. So
awesome. Well, hey, it was such a pleasure talking with Pranav. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely. So there we have it. That was Bill Macaitis, the former CMO of Slack and Zendesk. Tune in again next week for another discussion with another marketing scientist. See you then.